The Snow Woman. A Japanese ghost story. There are places where winter feels older than memory. Places where the mountains disappear beneath endless snow. Places where the wind seems to carry voices that no living person should hear. In the remote regions of Japan, stories like these have been told for centuries. Stories passed from parent to child, from traveler to traveler, from one long winter night to the next. Many of those stories have faded with time. Others have been forgotten entirely. But some legends refuse to disappear. They linger like footprints in fresh snow. Fragile. Silent. Waiting to be discovered again. Among the oldest and most feared of these tales is the story of a woman who appears during snowstorms. A woman of impossible beauty. A woman clothed in white. A woman who arrives with the cold wind and vanishes with the falling snow. People call her the Snow Woman. The Yuki-Onna. No one knows exactly what she is. Some believe she is a spirit born from winter itself. Others claim she is the ghost of a woman who froze to death long ago in the mountains. There are even those who whisper that she is something older than either life or death. Whatever the truth may be, the stories rarely end well. Travelers who encounter her are sometimes found frozen where they stand. Others disappear without leaving a trace, and some are never seen again at all. Yet every so often, someone survives. Someone lives long enough to tell what they witnessed. This is one such story. A story of a promise made during a storm. A story of love that should never have existed. A story of happiness built upon a secret, and of the terrible price that secret would one day demand. It begins many years ago in a small mountain village buried beneath winter snow. There, a young woodcutter named Minokichi set out on what seemed like an ordinary day. By the following morning, one man would be dead. Another would carry a memory that haunted him for the rest of his life. And somewhere within the endless white wilderness, a pair of dark eyes would continue watching, waiting, patient as winter itself. This is the legend of the Snow Woman. Chapter 1. The Woodcutters. Long ago, in a small village nestled among the snow-covered mountains of northern Japan, there lived a young woodcutter named Minokichi. He was strong, healthy, and full of the quiet confidence that often belongs to youth. Though he respected the dangers of the wilderness, he had never truly faced the darker mysteries hidden within the mountains. Most days he worked alongside an older woodcutter named Mosaku. Mosaku had spent nearly his entire life among the forests and valleys surrounding the village. His face was weathered by countless winters, and his hands carried the marks of years spent laboring beneath sun, rain, and snow. The villagers trusted him. When storms approached, they listened to his advice. When travelers became lost, they sought his guidance. Mosaku knew the mountains well. He understood their beauty, and he understood their dangers. There were places, he often said, where nature felt older than mankind itself. Places where strange things sometimes happened. Places best avoided after nightfall. Minokichi would usually smile when he heard such stories. He enjoyed listening to them, but he never truly believed them. Ghosts and spirits belonged to old legends, not to the real world. Or so he thought. One winter morning, Minokichi and Mosaku set out together before sunrise. A fresh layer of snow covered the ground. The air was cold and still. Above them, gray clouds drifted across the sky. Their destination lay beyond a river several miles from the village, where a dense forest provided timber for the community. The journey was familiar. The work was ordinary. Neither man expected the day to be remembered. For hours they cut wood among towering trees. The steady rhythm of their axes echoed through the silent forest. Snow occasionally fell from heavy branches overhead. The scent of pine lingered in the crisp air. Everything seemed peaceful. Yet as afternoon faded toward evening, Mosaku became uneasy. Several times he stopped working and studied the distant mountains. The wind had changed. The temperature had begun to fall. Dark clouds gathered beyond the peaks. At first, Minokichi noticed nothing unusual. Then he followed Mosaku's gaze. Far away, across the mountainside, something white was moving. Not drifting, advancing. A vast wall of swirling snow. The old woodcutter's expression darkened. "We should leave," he said quietly. Minokichi nodded. "A storm?" "A bad one." There was no fear in Mosaku's voice, only certainty. The mountains had given their warning. Now the storm was coming. The two men gathered their tools and began the journey home. Behind them, the forest grew darker. The trees seemed taller, the silence deeper. Above the distant peaks, the white storm continued its slow advance across the land. And neither woodcutter knew that before the night was over, one of them would be dead, and the other would encounter something that should not exist. Chapter 2. The Storm. Minokichi and Mosaku left the forest without delay. The last light of day was already fading behind the mountains. Above them, dark clouds rolled across the sky like an approaching tide. The wind grew stronger with every passing minute. Snow began to swirl through the trees. At first it drifted gently. Then it thickened. Soon the familiar mountain path was disappearing beneath a curtain of white. Neither man wasted words. They walked quickly, focused on reaching the river crossing before conditions became worse. For years, a small ferry had carried travelers between the two banks. Once they crossed, the village would not be far away. But the storm was moving faster than expected. By the time they reached the river, daylight had almost vanished. The world had become a landscape of snow and shadow. The opposite shore was barely visible through the blizzard. The river itself churned darkly beneath the gathering night. Minokichi felt unease settle in his stomach. The scene seemed strangely empty, strangely silent. He looked toward the dock. The ferryman was gone. The boat had been secured and pulled away from the water. No lantern burned. No voice answered when they called. The ferryman had already gone home. Mosaku stared across the river and slowly shook his head. "We won't cross tonight." Minokichi knew he was right. Even if the boat had been there, attempting the crossing in such weather would have been dangerous. The current was strong. The darkness was growing deeper, and the storm showed no sign of mercy. For a moment, the two men stood together while snow gathered upon their shoulders. Then Mosaku pointed toward a small structure farther up the bank. There, a weathered shelter stood beside the river. Built years earlier for travelers stranded by storms, it was little more than a wooden hut. Its walls were old. Its roof sagged beneath layers of snow. Yet tonight, it offered their only chance of safety. The two woodcutters hurried toward it. The wind howled around them. Snow stung their faces. By the time they reached the shelter, Minokichi could barely feel his hands. They stepped inside and shut the door behind them. At once, The worst of the wind was cut off. The storm still roared beyond the walls, but the small room offered protection from its fury. Minokichi sat against one wall and rubbed warmth back into his fingers. Mosaku lowered himself onto the floor nearby. For several moments, neither spoke. They listened to the storm. Snow rattled against the wooden walls. The roof creaked overhead. Occasionally, powerful gusts shook the entire structure. The sound seemed almost alive, as though something enormous moved through the darkness outside. Finally, Minokichi broke the silence. "Have you ever seen one this bad?" Mosaku nodded slowly. "A few times." The younger man waited. The old woodcutter stared toward the closed door. His eyes seemed distant. "When I was young," he said, "a storm like this trapped 3 travelers in the mountains." "What happened to them?" Mosaku was silent for a moment. Then he answered, "They never came back." The wind struck the shelter with sudden force. The walls groaned. Minokichi managed a nervous smile. "You always know how to make a person feel better." A faint chuckle escaped the old man. For a moment, the tension eased. Then another gust swept across the roof. The laughter faded. Night settled completely over the mountains. Darkness filled every corner of the shelter. There was nothing to do except wait for morning. Eventually, Mosaku wrapped himself in his cloak and lay down. "You should sleep," he said. "The storm will pass." Minokichi nodded. He stretched out on the hard wooden floor. Outside, the blizzard continued its endless cry. The hours passed. Little by little, exhaustion overcame him. His eyes grew heavy. The sounds of the storm became distant. And somewhere beyond the shelter walls, hidden within the snow and darkness, something was drawing near. Chapter 3. The Visitor. Sometime after midnight, Minokichi awoke. At first, he did not know why. The shelter was dark. The storm still raged outside. Snow scraped against the wooden walls. The wind moaned through every crack and seam. For several moments, he lay still, listening. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet, but different. Then he noticed the light. A faint glow filled the shelter. Soft, pale, unlike the warm glow of a lantern or fire. This light seemed colder somehow, almost silver. Minokichi slowly opened his eyes wider. The room was no longer completely dark. The strange illumination drifted across the walls and floor. His heart began to beat faster. He turned his head. The door stood open, just slightly. A narrow gap allowed snow and wind enter the room. The storm's icy breath swept across the floorboards. Minokichi frowned. He was certain the door had been closed. Mosaku had checked it himself. So who had opened it? Or what? The young woodcutter pushed himself up on one elbow. His pulse quickened. The pale light seemed strongest near the doorway. And there, standing silently within the opening, was a woman. For a moment, Minokichi thought he was dreaming. The figure did not seem real. She was dressed entirely in white. Her long garments moved gently despite the storm. Her hair fell dark against her shoulders. Her skin was impossibly pale. Not pale like ordinary skin. Pale like snow beneath moonlight. Beautiful. Terribly beautiful. The woman stepped into the shelter. No sound accompanied her movement. Not a footstep. Not the rustle of fabric. Nothing. She seemed to glide rather than walk. Minokichi wanted to speak, wanted to call out, but the words refused to come. A strange fear had settled over him. The kind of fear that exists before reason has time to explain itself. The woman did not look at him. Not at first. Instead, she approached Mosaku. The old woodcutter remained asleep, unaware, helpless. The pale stranger stood over him for several seconds, watching, silent, motionless. Then she bent forward, slowly, gracefully, and exhaled. A thin white mist drifted from her lips. It floated downward across Mosaku's face. For an instant, nothing happened. Then Minokichi saw the old man's body stiffen. His breathing stopped. The color drained from his skin. Frost spread across his cloak, across his hair, across the wooden floor beneath him. The transformation lasted only moments. When it ended, Mosaku lay perfectly still, cold, silent, dead. A wave of terror crashed through Minokichi. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he could not move. The woman straightened, slowly. At last she turned toward him. Their eyes met. Minokichi felt the blood freeze in his veins. The woman's face remained beautiful, yet something ancient looked out from behind those dark eyes. Something inhuman, something older than the mountains themselves. She studied him quietly, as though considering a difficult choice. The storm howled beyond the walls. Snow swirled through the open doorway. For a long moment, neither moved. Then the woman began walking toward him, closer and closer still, until she stood directly before him. The cold surrounding her was unbearable. Minokichi could scarcely breathe. His body trembled, his thoughts scattered. He was certain he would die, certain he would share Mosaku's fate. Yet the woman continued to stare at him, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with a strange expression he could not understand. Almost pity, almost sadness. Then she raised one pale hand and spoke for the first time. Her voice was softer than falling snow, yet every word carried through the shelter with perfect clarity. "You are very young." The wind seemed to pause. The storm itself appeared to listen. The woman tilted her head slightly, and for the first time, uncertainty touched her expression, as though something about Minokichi had changed her mind. The next words she spoke would alter the course of his life forever. Chapter 4. A Life Spared. The woman stood before Minokichi. Snow drifted through the open doorway behind her. The pale light that surrounded her filled the shelter with an eerie glow. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Her dark eyes remained fixed upon him, watching, measuring, deciding. Minokichi could barely breathe. Every part of his body trembled. He knew what he had seen. Mosaku lay frozen, only a few feet away. The old woodcutter's lifeless form was proof enough. The woman before him was no ordinary traveler, no ordinary human being. She belonged to the storm, to the mountains, to something far older than either. At last she spoke again. "You are young." Her voice remained calm, soft, beautiful, and somehow more frightening than the wind outside. "If I wished, I could kill you now." Minokichi lowered his eyes. He could not deny it. He could not escape it. The truth stood before him like winter itself. The woman studied him for a moment longer. Then, to his surprise, her expression softened. Only slightly, but enough for him to notice. You remind me of someone. The words seemed almost intended for herself, as though she had not meant to speak them aloud. For the first time, confusion mixed with Minokichi's fear. Who could she possibly mean? The woman did not explain. Instead, she looked toward the storm beyond the doorway. Snow whirled through the darkness. The night stretched endlessly across the mountains. When she turned back to him, her decision had been made. I will spare your life. Minokichi stared at her, certain he had misunderstood. The woman continued, but only on one condition. The shelter fell silent. Even the wind seemed distant now. You must never speak of this night. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The temperature dropped once more. Not to your father. Not to your mother. Not to your brothers or sisters. Not to your future wife. Not to your children. Not to anyone. Each sentence landed with the weight of a command. A promise demanded by something that could not be refused. If you tell anyone what happened here. The woman paused. The unfinished threat hung in the air between them. No explanation was necessary. Minokichi already understood. He glanced toward Masaku's frozen body. The meaning was perfectly clear. Fear tightened around his heart. Yet beneath that fear was something else. A desperate gratitude. He was being offered a chance to live. A chance he had never expected to receive. I promise, he whispered. The woman regarded him carefully, as though searching for dishonesty, as though weighing the value of his word. Finally, she nodded. For the first time, Minokichi sensed a trace of sadness in her expression. Not regret. Not quite. But something close. Perhaps she understood how difficult such a promise would become. Perhaps she already knew what the future held. Or perhaps she was simply a mystery beyond human understanding. The woman stepped backward. The pale glow surrounding her intensified. Snow swirled around her form. The wind outside rose once more. Its mournful cry echoed through the darkness. Then, without warning, the woman began to fade. Not disappear instantly. Not vanish like smoke. She seemed to dissolve into the storm itself. Her white garments blended with the drifting snow. Her outline softened, became indistinct. And then she was gone. Only the blizzard remained. The doorway stood open. The night beyond was empty. Minokichi remained frozen where he sat. His heart pounded against his ribs. The shelter felt impossibly silent. Slowly, reality returned. The cold floor beneath him. The storm outside. The terrible stillness of Mosaku's body. None of it had been a dream. None of it had been imagination. The night had been real. The woman had been real. And now he carried a secret that could never be shared. Exhaustion eventually overcame him. Somewhere between terror and disbelief, he drifted into uneasy sleep. When morning finally arrived, the storm had passed. Sunlight reflected brilliantly from fresh snow. The mountains appeared peaceful once more, as though nothing unusual had happened. But inside the shelter, Mosaku remained exactly where he had fallen. Cold, silent, and covered in frost. The villagers would later say that the old woodcutter had simply frozen during the storm. No one questioned it. No one suspected anything else. And Minokichi told them nothing, because he remembered the promise. And because, deep within his heart, he feared the beautiful woman of the snow was still listening. Chapter 5. Years pass. Life moved forward, as it always does. The seasons changed. Snow gave way to spring. Spring faded into summer. Summer surrendered to autumn. And autumn eventually returned to winter once more. The years passed quietly in the mountain village. Minokichi continued working as a woodcutter. He grew stronger, more experienced, more respected among the villagers. The reckless confidence of youth gradually softened into maturity. Yet one thing never changed: the memory of that night. No matter how much time passed, he could still see it clearly. The abandoned shelter, the pale light, the frozen body of Mosaku, and the beautiful woman who had stepped from the storm. At first, the memory haunted him. Every snowfall brought unease. Every winter wind stirred old fears. On certain nights, he would awaken suddenly, convinced he had heard footsteps outside his home, or a voice carried upon the wind. But nothing ever appeared. No pale figure emerged from the darkness. No supernatural visitor returned. Little by little, the terror faded. The memory remained. Yet it became something quieter, something distant, like a dream remembered from long ago. Still, Minokichi never forgot his promise. Not once. The secret remained buried within him. Years passed, then more years. The village changed. Children grew into adults. Families came and went. New homes appeared. Old faces disappeared. Time carried everything forward. One winter evening, when Minokichi was no longer a boy but a young man, he found himself traveling home alone along a snow-covered road. The day had been cold. The sky was already darkening. Snow drifted gently through the air. The mountains stood silent beneath fading light. It was the sort of evening that encouraged most people to hurry home. Yet Minokichi walked calmly. He had traveled this road many times. The village was not far away. Then he noticed someone ahead, a lone figure moving through the falling snow. At first he assumed it was another traveler, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a young woman. She appeared to be walking alone, without companions, without a lantern, without any sign of concern for the growing cold. Minokichi slowed his pace. The situation struck him as unusual. Travelers rarely journeyed alone after sunset during winter, especially young women. As he approached, the stranger turned toward him. The last light of evening illuminated her face, and for a moment, Minokichi forgot to breathe. She was extraordinarily beautiful, not in an artificial way, not in the manner of someone dressed for admiration. There was something natural about her beauty, something calm, something timeless. Snowflakes settled upon her dark hair, yet they seemed almost reluctant to remain there. The woman smiled politely. A simple gesture, nothing more. Yet the sight stirred an unexpected feeling within him. Not fear, not exactly, but a faint sense of recognition, as though he had seen her before, somewhere, long ago. The sensation vanished as quickly as it came. Minokichi dismissed it as imagination. The woman inclined her head. "Good evening." Her voice was soft, gentle, pleasant to hear. Minokichi returned the greeting. The two travelers stood together for a moment while snow drifted between them. Then the young woman glanced toward the distant village. "I seem to have lost my way." The words were simple, ordinary, yet before the evening ended, they would change the course of Minokichi's life forever. Chapter 6. The Woman on the Road. The young woman stood quietly beside the snow-covered road. The fading light of evening surrounded her. Snow drifted gently through the cold air. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Minokichi found himself studying her face. There was something strangely familiar about her. Not familiar in the ordinary sense. Not as though they had met before. Rather, she seemed connected to a memory he could not quite reach. A memory hidden just beyond the edge of thought. The woman smiled again. The uneasy feeling faded. "I seem to have wandered farther than I intended," she said. Her voice was calm and pleasant. "I was hoping to find shelter before nightfall." Minokichi glanced toward the mountains. Darkness was approaching quickly. The temperature would soon drop. Traveling alone after sunset in winter was dangerous, even for experienced travelers. "You're fortunate," he said. "My village is nearby." Relief appeared in her eyes. "Then perhaps I am." The answer made him smile. For reasons he could not explain, he immediately felt comfortable in her presence. The caution he normally showed toward strangers seemed to disappear. The two began walking together toward the village. As they traveled, conversation came easily. The woman explained that her name was Oyuki. She spoke little about her past. Whenever the discussion drifted toward family or her place of birth, she gently guided it elsewhere. Under ordinary circumstances, Minokichi might have found this suspicious. Yet somehow, he did not. The mystery surrounding her felt natural, as though certain questions simply did not need answers. The snow continued to fall. The road wound through silent fields and dark forests. Soon the lights of the village appeared ahead. Warm lanterns glowed behind paper windows. Smoke drifted upward from chimneys. The sight brought comfort after the long winter journey. When they arrived, Minokichi introduced Oyuki to a family known for offering shelter to travelers. The villagers welcomed her kindly. Such generosity was common in those days. Before leaving, Minokichi wished her a safe evening. To his surprise, Oyuki hesitated. Then she smiled. "Thank you." The words were simple. Yet something in the way she spoke them lingered with him long after he returned home. The following morning, he found himself thinking about her. The day after that, he thought about her again. And then again. Several days later, their paths crossed by chance within the village. Or so it seemed. They spoke for a few minutes. Then for an hour. Soon they began seeking opportunities to meet. Winter slowly deepened around them. The snow grew heavier. The nights grew longer. And with each passing day, Minokichi felt himself drawn closer to her. Oyuki possessed a quiet grace unlike anyone he had ever known. She was kind without being naive, gentle without being weak. She listened more than she spoke. Yet when she did speak, her words carried thoughtfulness and warmth. The villagers quickly grew fond of her. Many wondered where she had come from. Few received clear answers. Curiously, no one seemed troubled by that fact. It was as though Oyuki belonged wherever she happened to be, as though the village had been waiting for her all along. Months passed. Winter eventually yielded to spring. The snow melted. Flowers returned to the valleys. Life awakened once more. And still, Minokichi and Oyuki remained together. The affection between them deepened naturally, effortlessly, like two streams gradually joining into one. Then one evening, while watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Minokichi realized something. He could no longer imagine his life without her. The realization startled him. Yet it also brought peace. For the first time in many years, thoughts of the woman from the storm seemed distant. The fear that had once haunted him had nearly vanished. The mountains no longer felt threatening. Winter no longer filled him with dread. His future appeared clear, bright, hopeful. And somewhere deep within his heart, a promise made long ago remained buried beneath years of happiness. Waiting, silent, unbroken. For now. Chapter 7. Marriage. Before long, Minokichi asked Oyuki to marry him. The answer came with a smile, and with a quiet happiness that neither of them tried to hide. The villagers celebrated the marriage warmly. Many believed they were perfectly suited for one another. Minokichi was hard-working and respected. Oyuki was kind, graceful, and admired by everyone who knew her. Together, they seemed destined for a happy life. And for many years that appeared to be true. They built a home near the edge of the village. It was modest, simple, filled with the ordinary comforts of everyday life. A small hearth, wooden floors polished by years of use, windows that looked toward the mountains beyond the valley. There they began their life together. The early years passed peacefully. Minokichi continued his work in the forests. Oyuki cared for their home. When winter storms swept across the mountains, they sat together beside the fire. When spring arrived, they watched flowers bloom across the hillsides. Summer brought long days of labor and laughter. Autumn painted the forests in brilliant shades of gold and red. The rhythm of life settled around them. Steady, comforting, familiar. Then came children. One child, then another, and another after that. The house gradually filled with energy and noise. Tiny footsteps echoed across the floor. Laughter drifted through open windows. The quiet home became a lively one. Oyuki proved to be a wonderful mother. Patient, loving, gentle, even during difficult times. The children adored her. Whenever they were frightened, they sought her comfort. Whenever they were hurt, they ran to her side. And somehow, she always seemed to know exactly what they needed. Watching her with their children only deepened Minokichi's love. At times, he found it difficult to remember what life had been like before she appeared on that snowy road. It felt as though she had always been part of his world, as though she belonged there. Yet now and then, small details stirred faint questions in his mind. Questions he rarely allowed himself to consider. Oyuki seemed untouched by hardship. Years passed, but she changed very little. Her beauty remained almost exactly as it had been when they first met. The villagers occasionally remarked upon it. Some laughed and called her blessed by good fortune. Others joked that she had discovered a secret no one else possessed. Oyuki always smiled and accepted the compliments politely. Then she would change the subject. Minokichi laughed along with everyone else. Yet privately, he noticed the truth. Time moved differently for her. Or perhaps it did not move at all. There were other things. Winter never seemed to trouble her. The cold that sent others hurrying indoors appeared to have no effect. She could walk through falling snow without discomfort. She rarely wore extra layers. And even during the harshest storms, she remained calm. Perfectly calm. Occasionally, when Minokichi awoke during the night, he found her sitting quietly near a window, watching the snow, watching the darkness beyond the glass. Her expression in those moments was distant, almost wistful, as though part of her belonged somewhere beyond the village, somewhere beyond the world of ordinary people. Whenever she noticed him watching, she would smile. The strange feeling would disappear, and life would continue as before. Years passed in this way. Happy years. Peaceful years. Years filled with love, family, and ordinary joys. The memory of the storm remained buried deep within Minokichi's heart. A secret sealed by a promise he had never broken. But promises made in youth are not forgotten by time. And somewhere beyond the warmth of their home, winter was waiting. Patient, silent, certain, for the day the past would return. Chapter 8. Strange Signs. For many years, Minokichi and Oyuki lived happily together. Their children grew strong and healthy. Their home was filled with warmth, laughter, and the comforting routines of daily life. To anyone looking from the outside, they seemed like an ordinary family. Yet as the years passed, Minokichi began noticing small things. At first, they seemed insignificant, the sort of details a person could easily dismiss. And so he dismissed them. But they continued to gather, quietly, patiently, like snowflakes accumulating before a storm. One of the first things he noticed was Oyuki's relationship with the cold. Winter never affected her the way it affected everyone else. When icy winds swept through the village, people wrapped themselves in extra layers and hurried indoors. Oyuki remained perfectly comfortable. She could stand outside during snowfall without shivering. She could walk through freezing weather for hours and return home looking as though she had merely taken a pleasant stroll. Whenever anyone commented on it, she would smile. "I suppose I've always loved winter." The answer sounded natural, reasonable, yet it never completely satisfied him. There were other things. Her hands were often cool to the touch. Even after sitting beside the fire, they rarely felt truly warm. On winter nights when Minokichi reached for her hand, he sometimes felt a chill that reminded him of fresh snow. Not unpleasant, not frightening, just unusual. Then there was the matter of time. Years continued to pass. Children grew older. Neighbors aged. New lines appeared upon familiar faces. But Oyuki seemed unchanged. Her beauty remained untouched. Her dark hair retained its shine. Her pale skin appeared as youthful as ever. The passage of time seemed unable to claim her. At first, Minokichi considered himself fortunate. Many men envied him. Many women admired her. But eventually, admiration gave way to curiosity. And curiosity slowly became unease. The feeling was difficult to explain. Nothing about Oyuki seemed wrong. Yet something about her felt untouched by ordinary life, as though she existed slightly beyond the reach of the world around her. One winter evening, Minokichi awoke unexpectedly during the night. The house was silent. The fire had burned low. Beside him, Oyuki was gone. Assuming she was checking on the children, he rose quietly. Instead, he found her standing alone by a window. Snow drifted through the darkness outside. Moonlight reflected from the white landscape beyond the glass. Oyuki stood perfectly still. Not tense, not frightened, simply watching, as though listening to something far away, something carried upon the winter wind. For several moments, Minokichi remained in the doorway, observing her. The pale moonlight surrounded her figure. Her white face reflected the glow of the snow beyond. A strange feeling stirred within him, an old memory, a memory he had spent years trying not to revisit. Then Oyuki turned. The distant expression vanished. A gentle smile appeared. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Minokichi nodded. "Neither could you." She glanced back toward the falling snow. "I've always lacked winter nights." The answer was simple, ordinary, yet something about it left him unsettled. He returned to bed, but sleep came slowly. The image remained in his mind. The moonlight, the snow, the stillness, and the feeling that Oyuki belonged to that frozen landscape in a way no ordinary person ever could. As the years continued to pass, moments like these became more frequent. Never dramatic, never alarming, just small fragments of mystery, fragments that refused to disappear. And with each returning winter, the memory of a long-forgotten promise grew harder to ignore. Deep within his heart, something was awakening. A suspicion, a connection, a truth waiting patiently beneath the surface, like a shape hidden beneath freshly fallen snow, waiting for the wind to uncover it. Chapter 9. The Secret. The winter that changed everything arrived quietly. There were no warnings, no strange omens, no signs that fate had begun to move once again. It seemed like any other season. Snow covered the rooftops. Smoke drifted from chimneys into the cold evening sky. Children laughed in the village streets. Life continued as it always had. Yet beneath the surface of that ordinary winter, something long buried was beginning to awaken. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Minokichi sat beside the hearth with Oyuki. Outside, snow drifted softly through the darkness. Inside, the house was warm and peaceful. The fire crackled gently. Shadows danced across the walls. For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was a comfortable silence, the kind shared by two people who had spent many years together. Minokichi watched the flames. His thoughts wandered. Without warning, his mind returned to the storm. The abandoned shelter, the pale light, the woman in white. The memories arrived with startling clarity, more vivid than they had been in years. He tried to push them aside. Instead, they grew stronger. The images refused to fade. At last, he sighed. "There is something I've never told you." Across the room, Oyuki looked up from her sewing. A faint smile touched her lips. "Oh?" Minokichi hesitated. Part of him wanted to remain silent. Part of him wanted to finally set down the burden he had carried for so long. The promise had shaped his life. Perhaps it no longer mattered. After all, decades had passed. Surely an old memory could no longer hold power over him. At least, that is what he told himself. "I experienced something strange when I was young," he said. Oyuki carefully set aside her work. The smile faded from her face. "Tell me." Minokichi stared into the fire. Then he began. He spoke of the day he and Mosaku traveled into the mountains. He described the gathering storm, the abandoned ferry, the lonely shelter beside the river. As he spoke, every detail returned. The sound of the wind, the smell of snow, the feeling of fear. It was as though the years between then and now had vanished. Oyuki listened without interruption. Her expression remained calm, perfectly calm. Encouraged, Minokichi continued. He described waking in the middle of the night, the strange light, the beautiful woman standing in the doorway, the frozen breath that drifted from her lips, the death of Mosaku, the warning, the promise. Word by word, he revealed everything he had hidden for so many years. At last, he finished. Silence settled over the room. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow continued to fall. Minokichi forced a small laugh. Strange story, isn't it? He shook his head. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing. Oyuki did not answer. The silence stretched. Longer. And longer still. Slowly, Minokichi looked toward her. His smile disappeared. Something had changed. Oyuki was no longer looking at him with warmth. Her face had become completely still, completely unreadable. The room suddenly felt colder. The fire seemed weaker. The shadows deeper. For reasons he could not explain, fear began to rise within him. The same fear he had felt in the shelter all those years ago. Then Oyuki raised her eyes, and in that instant, Minokichi understood that he had made a terrible mistake. The promise he had carried for so many years had finally been broken. And somewhere beyond the walls of the house, the winter wind began to stir. Chapter 10. Revelation, Part 1. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. The silence inside the room felt unnatural. Even the fire seemed quieter than before. Minokichi stared at Oyuki. She sat perfectly still. Her sewing rested forgotten in her lap. The warm expression he had known for so many years had vanished. In its place was something distant, something unreadable. A cold sensation spread through his chest. "Oyuki?" he said softly. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she lowered her eyes. The room fell silent once more. Outside, snow drifted steadily through the darkness. The wind had begun to rise. Its low voice moved around the house like a warning. When Oyuki finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You told me." Minokichi frowned. "What?" "The story." Slowly, she raised her head. Her eyes met his. A chill passed through him. There was nothing openly threatening in her gaze, and yet the fear he had felt as a young man returned with terrifying force. "You told me what happened that night." Her words were calm. Too calm. The fire crackled softly between them. Minokichi forced a smile. It was only an old memory. But even as he spoke, doubt entered his mind. Oyuki continued looking at him, unblinking, silent. The temperature inside the room seemed to fall. The warmth from the hearth felt distant. The shadows stretched longer along the walls. Then Oyuki slowly stood. The movement was graceful, almost weightless. For a brief instant, she reminded him of someone else, someone he had not seen in decades. His heartbeat quickened. A terrible possibility began to form. No, it couldn't be. The idea was impossible, and yet the feeling refused to leave him. Oyuki stepped closer to the fire. The pale light illuminated her face. Her skin appeared almost luminous. her dark hair framed features untouched by age, untouched by time itself. Suddenly, Minokichi remembered all the things he had chosen not to question. The years that had passed without changing her. The cold that never seemed to affect her. The winter nights spent gazing silently into falling snow. The strange familiarity he had felt when they first met. One memory connected to another, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. The room felt colder still. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls. Snow rattled softly against the windows. Then Oyuki spoke again. "You promised." The words struck him harder than any blow. His breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he could only stare. The years disappeared. The shelter returned. The storm returned. The pale woman standing over Mosaku returned. Every memory came rushing back. "You promised never to tell anyone." Minokichi slowly rose to his feet. Fear filled every part of him. "No," he whispered. But the denial sounded weak, even to himself. Oyuki's expression remained unchanged. Sad, calm, certain. The fire dimmed. The shadows deepened. And somewhere beyond the walls of the house, the winter wind began to howl. Minokichi suddenly understood that the secret he had carried for so many years had finally caught up with him. The promise had been broken, and whatever came next could no longer be avoided. Then Oyuki took a slow breath. When she spoke again, her voice seemed to carry the sound of distant snowfall. "Have you truly forgotten who I am?" The question lingered in the cold air between them. And in that terrible moment, Minokichi knew the answer before she spoke another word. Chapter 11. Revelation, Part 2. Minokichi felt the world shift beneath him. The answer had already formed within his heart. Perhaps he had known it from the very beginning. From the moment he first met Oyuki on that snowy road. Or perhaps from the countless winter nights when he found her watching the falling snow in silence. The signs had always been there. Quiet, patient, waiting. But knowing something and accepting it are not the same. Now there could be no more denial, no more comforting explanations, no more illusions. The truth stood before him. Beautiful. Terrible. Unavoidable. Oyuki looked at him with eyes filled not with anger, but with sorrow. A sorrow so deep that it seemed older than memory itself. At last she spoke. "I was the woman in the shelter." The words fell softly into the silence. Yet they struck harder than thunder. Minokichi closed his eyes. For a moment he could not breathe. When he opened them again, Oyuki was still standing there. Still the woman he loved. Still the mother of his children. And yet she was also something else. Something born from winter. Something beyond human understanding. The fire flickered weakly. A cold draft swept through the room. The shadows trembled. And for an instant, Minokichi thought he saw another figure standing where Oyuki stood. A woman clothed entirely in white. A face pale as fresh snow. Dark eyes reflecting endless winter. Then the vision faded. Oyuki remained. But the moment had lasted long enough. There could be no doubt. "You," Minokichi whispered. The word broke apart before he could finish it. Oyuki lowered her gaze. "I spared your life." Her voice was gentle. "Do you remember?" He nodded slowly. Every detail had become painfully clear. The shelter, Mosaku, the promise, the warning, all of it. I should have killed you when you spoke of that night. The words sent a chill through him. Yet there was no hatred in her voice. Only regret. Only sadness. The sadness of someone forced to choose between duty and love. Outside, the wind cried around the house. Snow brushed softly against the windows. The storm seemed to be awakening once more. I waited, Oyuki continued. I hoped you would forget. Minokichi stared at her. Forget? How could anyone forget such a thing? And yet he understood what she meant. Not forget the event itself. Forget the need to speak of it. Forget the burden. Forget the promise. But he had failed. After all those years, he had failed. Tears glimmered in Oyuki's eyes. For the first time, Minokichi realized how much pain this moment caused her. She was not standing before him as an executioner. She was standing before him as a wife, as a mother, as someone whose heart was breaking. The realization hurt more than fear ever could. I never meant to betray you, he said. His voice trembled. I know. The answer came immediately. And somehow, that made everything worse. Because she believed him. Because she understood. Because none of it changed what had happened. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind howled outside. The fire burned lower and lower. And between them stood a truth that could no longer be hidden. A truth that would soon demand its final price. Chapter 12. Departure. Part 1. The silence that followed felt endless. Minokichi stood motionless beside the hearth. Oyuki remained across from him. The fire between them had nearly burned down to glowing embers. Its fading light cast long shadows across the room. Outside, the wind carried snow through the darkness. The storm had returned. Or perhaps it had never truly left. For many years, it had simply been waiting. Waiting for this night. Waiting for this moment. Minokichi lowered his head. I broke my promise. The words sounded small, fragile, powerless against the weight of what had happened. Oyuki did not deny it. You did. Her voice remained gentle. Yet there was finality in it now. The certainty of a door slowly closing. Minokichi clenched his hands. Fear still lingered within him. But another feeling had begun to replace it. Sorrow. Not for himself. For her. For the years they had shared. For everything that was about to end. If you must punish me, he said quietly, then do it. The words surprised even him. But they were true. He could not run. Could not fight. Could not undo what had already been done. Oyuki closed her eyes. For a moment, pain crossed her face. When she opened them again, they glistened with tears. You still don't understand. The words were barely a whisper. Minokichi looked at her. The pale light from the dying fire reflected in her eyes. I should kill you. The statement hung in the air. Simple. Terrible. Unavoidable. I should have done it the moment you spoke. The wind struck the house. The walls creaked softly. Snow brushed against the windows. Minokichi waited, but Oyuki did not move. She simply stood there, trembling ever so slightly, as though fighting a battle invisible to anyone else. Then her gaze shifted, past him, toward the sleeping rooms beyond. toward the children. At once, everything changed. The hardness in her expression vanished. The ancient, distant presence that had seemed to surround her softened. She became, once again, the woman he had loved for so many years. The mother of their children. "Our children are sleeping," she said softly. Minokichi turned toward the hallway. The house remained quiet, peaceful, unaware of the tragedy unfolding within it. Oyuki took a slow breath. They need their father. The words broke something inside him. Not because they offered hope, but because they revealed the sacrifice hidden within her decision. She was choosing them, choosing the children, choosing the family they had built together. Even now, even after the promise had been broken, tears filled Minokichi's eyes. "Oyuki." She shook her head gently. "Listen to me." Her voice carried an urgency he had never heard before. "There is very little time." The wind outside rose once more. A mournful sound drifted through the darkness, as though winter itself were calling her name. Oyuki glanced toward the sleeping rooms again. A faint smile touched her lips. "Sad. Beautiful. Filled with love. Take care of them." The words were meant for a husband, for a father, for the man who would remain after she was gone. And in that moment, Minokichi finally understood. She had already made her choice. The question was no longer whether she would kill him. The question was whether she could stay. Deep within his heart, he already knew the answer, and it terrified him more than death. Chapter 13, Departure, Part 2. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The house remained silent. Beyond the walls, snow drifted through the darkness. The wind moved across the mountains with a lonely voice. Minokichi looked at Oyuki, at the woman he had loved for so many years. The woman who had shared his life, raised their children, filled their home with warmth and happiness. And now, because of a promise broken long ago, she was slipping beyond his reach. Oyuki. Her name was all he could manage. Nothing else seemed large enough. Nothing else seemed capable of holding his grief. A faint smile touched her lips. Not the smile of the mysterious woman from the snow. Not the smile of an immortal spirit. The smile of a wife. The smile of a mother. The smile of someone saying goodbye. Slowly, she turned toward the hallway that led to the children's rooms. For several seconds, she stood listening. The house was still. Somewhere in the darkness, a child shifted in sleep. A floorboard creaked softly. Then silence returned. A tenderness entered Oyuki's expression, deeper than sadness, deeper than regret. Love. Simple and undeniable. "They were my greatest happiness," she whispered. Minokichi felt tears rise to his eyes. He wanted to speak, wanted to beg her to stay, wanted to promise that somehow they could escape this fate. But he knew such words would change nothing. The choice had already been made. Oyuki looked back at him. The pale light in the room seemed brighter now. Not warm, not cold, simply otherworldly, as though the boundary between this world and another had begun to thin. "You must live well," she said. "Raise them with kindness. Protect them. Tell them they were loved." Each sentence felt like a farewell carved into his heart. The wind outside grew stronger. Snow brushed against the windows. The storm was calling her, and she could no longer refuse. Minokichi took a step forward, then another. At last he stood before her. For a moment, Neither moved. Then he reached for her hand, the same hand he had held through countless seasons, the same hand that had comforted frightened children, the same hand that had built a home beside him. Her fingers were cool, just as they had always been. Only now did he truly understand why. Tears slipped down his face. "I loved you," he whispered. Oyuki's eyes shimmered. "And I loved you." The answer came without hesitation, without doubt, without regret. For an instant, the years seemed to fall away. The secret, the fear, the sorrow. Only love remained. Then the pale light surrounding her began to grow. Snowflakes appeared within the room itself, drifting silently through the air. The wind found its way through cracks that had not existed moments before. Minokichi tightened his grip, but her hand was already becoming distant, like mist, like falling snow. "Oh, Yuki." She smiled one final time, a smile filled with love and with heartbreak. "Goodbye, Minokichi." The words were almost lost beneath the voice of the storm. Then her form began to fade. Not suddenly, not violently, but gently, as though winter itself were reclaiming something that had never truly belonged to the human world. The light softened. The snow swirled. Her outline dissolved into whiteness. And then she was gone. Only drifting snow remained. Only silence. Only the empty space where she had stood. Minokichi remained motionless, unable to move, unable to speak. The storm slowly quieted. The house settled once more into stillness. Somewhere down the hallway, a child slept peacefully, unaware that a mother had just vanished into legend. Minokichi stood alone beside the dying fire, listening to the silence, and knowing that when morning came, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. Chapter 14. Epilogue. Morning arrived quietly. The storm had passed. Fresh snow covered the village. The mountains shone beneath a pale winter sky. To the world outside, it seemed like an ordinary morning. But inside Minokichi's home, everything had changed. He searched every room, every corner, every doorway, though part of him already knew the truth. Oyuki was gone. No footprints marked the snow outside. No sign revealed where she had gone. It was as though she had dissolved into the winter night itself. Only her absence remained. The children noticed it soon enough. They asked where their mother had gone, when she would return, why she had left without saying goodbye. Questions no father could easily answer. Questions Minokichi could never answer completely. So he told them only what he could. That their mother loved them, that she had loved them more than anything in the world, and that sometimes, even when people disappear, that love remains. The children did not fully understand. How could they? Yet life continued, because life always continues. The years passed. The children grew. The small house that had once echoed with laughter gradually became quieter. One by one, they became adults. They built lives of their own. Some married, some left the village. Others remained near the mountains where they had been born. And through it all, Minokichi kept his promise to Oyuki. He cared for them, protected them, loved them, just as she had asked. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Spring followed winter. Summer followed spring. Autumn followed summer. And always, winter returned. Year after year. Snow upon the mountains. Snow upon the rooftops. Snow falling softly through the night. Each snowfall brought memories, not only of loss, but of happiness, of evenings beside the fire, of children's laughter, of quiet conversations shared at the end of long days, of a woman whose smile could brighten even the coldest winter night. As Minokichi grew older, the memories became more precious and more painful. Sometimes during heavy snowfall, he would sit alone by the window and watch the darkness beyond the glass. Watching, waiting, listening, just as Oyuki once had. And on certain nights, when the wind moved gently across the mountains, he imagined he could feel her presence. Not as a ghost, not as something frightening, but as a memory carried upon the snow. A reminder that she had been real, that she had lived, that she had loved. Many years later, when Minokichi had become an old man, villagers still spoke of strange things seen during winter storms. Travelers told stories of a beautiful woman dressed in white, a woman who appeared among falling snow and vanished before dawn. Some dismissed such tales as superstition. Others listened carefully, for in the mountains, old legends are rarely forgotten. And some stories survive because a small part of them is true. No one knows what became of Oyuki after she left. Perhaps she returned to the frozen wilderness from which she came. Perhaps she wandered the snowy mountains alone. Or perhaps she still walks through winter storms, even now. Silent. Beautiful. Unchanged by time. Waiting where snow and wind meet beneath the moonlit sky. As for Minokichi, he never saw her again, but he never forgot her. Not for a single day. And whenever winter returned, bringing its endless white silence across the mountains, he would remember the woman who came from the snow, the woman who spared his life, the woman who became his wife, the woman he loved. And somewhere beyond the reach of human sight, where the winter wind drifts endlessly across fields of untouched snow, perhaps another pair of dark eyes still watches. Patient, silent, and filled with memories of a love that could never truly belong to either world. This is the legend of the Snow Woman. And like the falling snow itself, some stories never completely disappear. They simply wait for winter to tell them again. The end.